Hi, it's Jackie again with Total Cable Solutions, and this is a Cable Corner Extra. In this special edition, we will be discussing some of the connectivity challenges that data centers face on a daily basis. To explore this further, I'd like to introduce one of our enterprise cabling experts, Tom Hudson.
Well, thanks, Jackie. On average, data centers spend about 3 to 5% of their budgets on cabling and connectivity, but it's often the most important piece. One of the biggest components of our cabling budget is our fiber. I'm going to spend a little bit more time talking about the fiber side of things, but we're also going to talk about power cords and category copper cabling as well. Many of you may have a data center, a spot in your data center that looks similar to this. It's kind of the fiber jungle. And usually it occurs over several years of folks not owning the environment and multiple vendors in their crisscrossing cables. Obviously, we're looking for more of an organized cable infrastructure similar to what you see in this picture. There's three major approaches when you talk about running your cables in the data center. There's pros and cons with each of these methods. You can take a home road approach, which is basically point to point. With home runs, they're very simple, and it relies on the fact that you may have very few moves, adds, and changes in your environments. But on the flip side of things, it can lead to the fiber jungle because you could have a lot of crisscrossing cables in the environment. Or you could be doing a structured cabling, which is typical of most large and enterprise type data centers. And this is where you're deploying your patch panel systems, putting patch panels close to where the ports are so that you have a main patch area and a remote patch area. And it allows for faster moves, adds, and changes by simply using short patch cords. The downside to it is that it is more complex, it does need to be documented, and there needs to be proper ownership in the data center so somebody is making sure documentation is up to date and has those responsibilities. Because if it's not kept up to date and documented well, then it's going to make it much more difficult for troubleshooting. And the third major approach that you see out there is TOR, or top of rack. It really doesn't even deploy fiber. In fact, it eliminates the need for structured cabling altogether. This is where top of rack switches are deployed at the top of every rack or cabinet. So let's talk a little bit more about top of rack architecture. In this example, you can see that the switches are placed at the top of every cabinet or rack. They're typically put in pairs for AV redundancy as well. That allows you to use short copper or direct attach cables from the switch and service all of the ports that are within that rack from an Ethernet perspective. The downside to this is that it is typically 2 to 3 times the electronics cost. It also means you're going to have more switches to manage and configure in the environment. And oftentimes this can also lead to being locked into a single vendor. The pros, of course, is you're going to be placing the ports closer to the equipment. And it's going to reduce your cable plant costs. And of course your cable congestion as well because you're using shorter patches. Let's talk a little bit about performance when it comes to fiber cables. With increasing speeds today of 40, 100, and soon to be 400 gig speeds and feeds, it's becoming even more important to use low-loss connectors. Typically in today's infrastructure, you see MTP and LC connectors. From an MTP perspective, you want to look for connectors that are able to produce an insertion loss of 0.25 dB or less. And from an LC perspective, you want to look for connectors that are able to produce 0.15 dB or less. Why is this important? Well, as the speeds increase, our dB budgets are shrinking. You can see as we have moved from 1 gig to 10 gig to 100 gig and now the new 400 gig standards that are coming out, that the dB budgets have gone from 4.5 clear down to 1.9. Using a low loss connector is going to help you get some of that DB budget back. In addition to that, there is what's known as OM4 Plus, and it's typically a purple cable. It's basically a better version of OM4. It has lower attenuation over distance, and it's going to allow you to get some of your DB budget back as well. In this chart, you can see that running at 40 gig, standard OM4, you can only go about 170 meters. With the newer OM4 Plus, again, purple jacket, allows you to get your distance capabilities back to 300 meters. And this is becoming more and more important as data centers grow and grow from floor to floor and in a campus environment from building to building. Now here's some good news. There's actually a new standard out there for 100 gig. Up until today, 100 gig connections used the CFP approach, which meant that you had to have 10 lanes or 10 fibers of 10 gig transmit and 10 lanes or 10 fibers of 10 gig receive. And that required using the rather expensive and more complex 24 fiber MTP connector. It works great. But the new standards are based on the fact that transceivers are now capable of putting out 25 gig per lane. And this has led to the new QSFP28 standard, which actually leverages 4 lanes of 25 gig transmit and 4 lanes of 25 gig receive. And there's also the new SFP28 standard. And this utilizes 2 lanes, again, of 25 gig send and receive. What does this all mean for the data center? Well, it means that the same QSFP fiber cables that you use today in your 40 gig connections can also be used for the new QSFP28 100 gig connections. So you can reuse those same cables as you migrate from 40 gig to 100 gig. And it is also true of the SFP Plus. 10 gig cables can also now support the SFP 28 standard, which is pushing the 25 gig speed, reusing the same cable plant. You can go out and spend money on the best fiber cable that you can, but if it's not properly installed in the environment using some best practices, you're never going to get the best performance, and in fact, you could damage the fiber cable itself. So it's important to use all cable tray and managers that are available to you as you're running the cable from point A to point B. This means using all cable management that is inside your rack, any basket or cable tray that is above or below the floor in your environment, and of course, avoid crisscrossing cables. This is going to lead to a lot of tangle problems down the road. And also, where you do have to take bends with the fiber cable, take very gentle bends and try to keep any coiling of the slack no less, I should say, than about 8 inches in diameter. And of course, be very careful when you're running your fiber cables and basket tray. From a best practices standpoint, try to keep your fiber over in one corner of the basket tray and your copper over in the other. What can happen over time is other cables can be piled on and of course can crush fiber cables, which are much more fragile if they're on the very bottom of the pile. It's really important to use a pulling eye, especially if your runs are over 100 foot. And the pulling eye is going to allow the connectors on the ends to be protected as you're pulling the fiber cables through your tray or below the floor. It's also extremely important to label and document both ends of the cable, whether it's a source and destination approach or simply having serial numbers and length, and then on a spreadsheet noting what connections and ports and patch panels they're going to. Make sure that it is documented on the cable. This will help immensely when you're troubleshooting down the road. It's also very important to dress your fiber cables with Velcro. This is going to allow you to do some strain relief and bundle cables together to avoid snag points. And it's an opportunity to show off the good work that you have done. Also, do not put cables in harm's way. And what I mean by that is keep it away from pinch points. Whether it's pinch points below the floor near floor tiles that are going to be pulled up or near doors that are going to be closed in a cabinet or a rack. There's 2 different approaches when it comes to choosing your fiber cables. You can either go with a pre-terminated solution or you can try to do a field termination. And there are pros and cons to both of these approaches. From a pre-terminated perspective, you typically are going to get consistency and get the best quality because it is manufactured in a clean environment. It's also going to be able to offer you the best in terms of a warranty, and it is also the most cost-effective option. On the downside, it can increase some of the slack management. You may measure it off and think you need a 50-foot cable, and in fact, you need a 45-foot cable, so you're going to have to coil out 5 foot of that slack. Not a biggie, but it's something to keep in mind. Plus, all pre-terminated cables come individually packaged. So there's a little bit of time with unpackaging and inventorying them, getting them out of the bag and undoing the twist ties and the coils and everything else. On the field terminated side, it's still one of the best options out there for longer runs. It's not going to be the most cost effective, but it also could be faster, especially if you're doing floor-to-floor type runs that are going through long conduits or in a campus environment. It's going to allow you to reduce the amount of slack that you have on the cable run. And the good news is the tools that are available today to do fusion splicing with pigtails have gotten so much more robust than they were several years ago. On the downside of it, again, field termination will always be a more expensive option for you. It can also adversely affect your operations because it is very intrusive to your environment, and you're going to have to kind of manage around that time. And it does take some time to do fusion splicing and do the testing. Also, the downside to field termination is the ability to have a more robust warranty associated with it. So keep that in mind. I often get asked, is smaller better? And when it comes to cables, I think the answer is mostly yes. Today, for fiber, most patch cords use a single 2mm round cable. And this allows you to reduce cable congestion in your rack, up in the basket tray or above the rack, and also below the floor. Make sure that the fiber cable that you're purchasing for the application has the right amount of protection. Does it require armor? Do you need a plenum rated? Do you need indoor-outdoor? Because you're going to be traversing beyond your 4 walls of your data center. Certainly something to keep in mind. Now, is smaller better when it comes to patch panels? Well, for the most part, yes, but there are some trade-offs. And there's basically 3 categories of patch panels today. Now, I'm talking about the typical 1RU type of panels. There are standard panels that can typically go up to about 72 fibers in them. There's also high density panels that can support up to about 96 fibers in them. And there's this new generation of what are often referred to as ultra high density patch panels that allow you to go up to 144, even 288 fibers in a single panel. The trade-off with more dense panels is the fact that you're not going to have as much real estate on that panel for labeling the ports with, say, a P-Touch or with some specific labeling. With the ultra high density and the high density panels, you will be at the mercy of the silk screening or the coordinate system that is already pre-installed for identifying ports on that particular panel. However, one of the amazing benefits of an ultra high density or a high density patch panel is the fact that you can put a lot of ports in a 1RU space. As an active member of TIA, there is an upcoming change to the TIA 568.3-D standard. That's something I want to make you aware of, because there's going to be some specific recommendations that will be put forth that will affect the 24 fiber backbone cabling connectivity that you have in your data center. There's going to be some new nomenclature for describing the polarity to differentiate it from a typical 12 fiber NTP backbone. It's still under review, but likely to be approved later this year. Believe it or not, on the horizon is 400 gig, which will be expressed as 400G base SR16 standards. In order to do the 400 gig, it's going to rely on 16 lanes or 16 fibers of 25 gig transmit and 16 lanes of 25 gig receive. This is going to allow you to approach the 400 gig speed. The 32 fiber NTP or MPO connector is currently in development, and it will be necessary to use that form factor whenever 400 gig ports become available in your environment. Let's switch gears a little bit. Let's talk about copper connectivity in the data center. Believe it or not, copper is still very much alive. It's still very relevant for the low bandwidth connections that are at the edges of your network. It's very cost effective. There's an abundance of it already in your data center, and it's easy to field terminate as well. Just about anybody with a standard Kremper and some bulk cable can terminate a Cat5e or a Cat6 in the field. You do find that color coding is used very commonly in the data center today. Allows you to distinguish for certain applications such as VoIP data center, database type applications, maybe to express Unix connections, so that network personnel know at a glance by the color what that connection is supporting and whether or not they should be allowed to even touch it or disturb it. Now, Cat6 is still extremely relevant out there. It supports up to 1 gig, and it's probably the most popular that we sell still here today. But as you move into those 10 gig connections, there's a couple of options that you're going to want to consider that are available to you. You could go with a 10 gig copper transceiver and then go with a Cat6a Ethernet. Now that's Cat6 augmented, called Cat6a, Ethernet cable. You could also go to a Twin-X or a direct attached cable to support those 10 gig connections. Or you could look at a fiber-based solution by using an active optic cable or by using a fiber optic transceiver with an LC patch cord. Today, TCS supports all 4 options for 10 gig connectivity. Also, for the new 25 gig connections that we talked about, per the new SFP28 standard, we also offer those same 4 options as well. Now, interestingly enough, Cat7 has been out for quite some time and has been adopted by Europe, but Cat8 is soon going to be approved, and the standards will be ratified that will actually support 40 gig across copper cable, believe it or not. The interesting thing is whether or not you're going to be able to do it through a patch panel system, and you're certainly going to have a distance limitation that's pretty extreme, somewhere in that 80 to 100 foot max distance. Now, there's several issues that come up when you talk about copper cable congestion in the data center today. Most of us are dealing with Cat6 cables that are typically very thick, like this, much thicker than a standard fiber cable. One of the new trends today is to move towards the new 28 gauge, which we call our Profit Ultra Slim cable. And it's available for both Cat6 1 gig connections and Cat6a for 10 gig connections. We recommend that you typically keep the links less than about 7 meters, or that's about 25 feet in length. And it's certainly not a replacement for horizontal cabling paths where you need solid cable when you're going up and over and in between patch panel systems. But for in-rack short patches under 25 foot, this is the cable of preference. It's going to greatly reduce the cable congestion as you have connections coming into those high density patch panels and very dense switches at the top of your racks. Anything that's 32 or even 48 ports on a 1RU gets very crowded. The 28 gauge, as you dress the cables into them, reduce that cable congestion by about 50%. So it's a really good application. And also, one of the benefits behind the 28 gauge is that it's very flexible. So as you're going in and out of cable managers, routing of the cable is extremely easy compared to the old bulky typical Cat6 cable. Now, you're always going to have a need for your basic Cat6 cables where you're connecting up to the workstations out in your environment. It's not going away anytime soon. And certainly from a patch panel perspective, you still want to use those solid conductor quality Cat6. Sometimes you may need it shielded depending on where that cable is going to be going from point A to point B. But typically, you do not need a shielded solution. Here at TCS, we offer all those solutions that I just mentioned, plus many more. You may need 24 ports, 48 or more in your patch panel. We have a variety of patch panels, including our Profit patch panel, which is 24 ports in a 1RU. One of the benefits behind that is it has ample space for documenting each port, which from a lot of our customers and end users they really enjoy that feature. It's not as crowded as most other people's cables. And of course, it's very important to keep our servers and switches and devices in the data center powered up and breathing. What's quickly becoming a best practice today is use color coding of your PDU power connections. One of the major advantages of doing this is going to allow you to easily differentiate between your primary and secondary power feeds from the PDUs into your dual-ported devices. Almost all servers and switches have redundancy when it comes to power supplies, so it allows you to show your A and your B feeds. At the same time, you're going to want to right-size those power cords. So in addition to using colors to differentiate, you're going to want to make sure that you're using a power cord that doesn't require you to put a lot of slack into it. This is going to easily reduce cable congestion on the back side of your cabinets wherever your power feeds are. Now, most major PDU manufacturers today offer locking outlets as a feature on their PDUs. And one of the things that we offer here at TCS is the P-lock style mechanism. It takes full advantage of that locking feature. Once you plug it in, you get that reassuring click or snap that tells you that the power cord is plugged in and it is secure and is not going to be able to be unplugged unless you unclip it and pull it out. It's important to match the power cord to the rating of the outlet that you're going to be plugging into. And of course, be prepared to carry some local safety stock at your premises of various colors that you are standardized on, typically blue and red, as well as some standard lengths. That way there's always a power cord in the right color and at the right length if you've got a very quick move, add, or change that needs to take place on the floor. So we covered an awful lot in this Cable Corner Extra. We talked about some of the new fiber specs that are required to support the 4100 gig speeds that are coming out, and some that are available today, as well as some of the things that you can reduce cable congestion in your racks and in your data center. And also some of the advantages of color coding your category and power cord connections to the PDUs. Thanks for tuning in. Feel free, if you have any questions, to contact me at tom@totalcablesolutions.com.
If you would like more information, contact us today. Visit us on YouTube and stay tuned for more informative videos from Total Cable Solutions.